Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this Black Sun FRC webinar. Really excited to be here today, even though it is a Friday afternoon. So welcome to the event. It's really great to have so many of you sign in today. I'm really excited about hosting this event with the FRC. This is actually the 4th year that we've put on this event, which we've entitled All You Need to Know About Corporate Governance and Reporting this season. We always do it about this time of year, and our intent really is to give all of you corporates a real overview of what's happening and what you need to know about corporate governance and reporting to get you prepared for this season. This has always been a really exciting event for us. The bad news this year is that we won't be able to hold our usual drinks reception afterwards, but the good news is we will be able to accommodate more than 3 times the number that we have done in the past. So we're really excited about all of you signing in today and looking forward to sharing with you what the FRC's got to share with us. So for those of you that don't know me, I'm Sally Pilot. I look after insight and engagement at Black Sun and our overall sort of engagement and thought leadership. Today on our panel with the FRC, I'm really delighted to have Kate O'Neill. Kate will be playing a dual role today, which is great. Unfortunately, Sir John Thompson had to drop out at the last minute, so Kate will be giving some overarching remarks on the FRC and the direction of travel and some of the activities. And then we will hear from Deepa Ravel, who will give us an overview of the future of corporate reporting and the FRC's view on non-financial reporting and their involvement in that, which will be really exciting. And then we've got David Stiles, who will give us an overview of what's happening in his area, which really concerns around corporate governance and the stewardship codes. Really looking forward to that. And then finally, we'll have Phil Fitzgerald from the Financial Reporting Lab to give us an update on some of the projects that are going on there. And I know a lot of you are involved in those projects, so it'll be great to hear an update on all of those things. The way that we're going to run it is we're going to hear from Kate at the beginning. She's going to give about a 10 or a 15-minute overview, touching on some of the highlights in terms of the changes to reforms and some of the planned activity from the FRC, and give us an update on that, and also give us an update on what this really means for UK PLC and things that we need to be looking out for in the future and how that fits with the wider reform agenda. We will then do a Q&A. If you'll notice at the bottom of your screen, there's a Q&A. So I'm looking forward to having lots of questions that we can pose to the FRC. This is really great to have the whole senior team here and spend the next hour and a half with us. So if you've got any questions, please pose them and I will ask them of the FRC. We will then move on to hear from each of the individuals on what I outlined before. And again, we'll be taking Q&As throughout. So just before we get started, Linda, if you could launch the poll just to set some context, while I just give a bit of a background around Black Sun for those of you that don't know Black Sun. So Linda, if you could launch the poll, please. That's good. Now we've got a couple of polling questions, introductory questions, just to give us a little context for some of the key themes taking place in governance and reporting right now. If you would be so kind as to share some of your thoughts on that, and we'll feed that into discussions later on. So a little bit about Black Sun, in case you don't know us. We're an international stakeholder communications company. We really work with a large number of corporates internationally, really helping them to define, articulate, and communicate their value creation story to their various different audiences, okay? So we're very much about helping companies articulate and bring their corporate story to life and communicate that story to their various different stakeholders across many different channels. Whether that's annual reports, sustainability reports, other reports, corporate websites, social media, or increasingly around internal communications campaigns and strategies, okay? So that was just a little bit about Black Sun. And what I'm going to do now is give you a minute or two to fill out the polling questions. And I'm going to pass over now to Kate. Kate recently joined the FRC. This is actually the second webinar she's done with us at Black Sun, which is great. I think her first one, she was sort of a week into the job. So it's really great to have her back. She's the new Director of Stakeholder Engagement and Corporate Affairs. I believe that's the job title. I hope we've got it right. And as I said, Kate is going to kindly give an overview for us, taking the place of Sir John Thompson. So, Kate, without further ado, I'll hand it over to you to give us an overview. Welcome. You're on mute, Kate.
I'm sorry, I thought you were controlling the mute, which is always a good idea with me, but never mind. Thanks, Sally, for that kind introduction. And thanks to the Black Sun team for hosting the FRC for this always interesting event. And it's great to see such a high level of interest and have so many people attend, especially on a rainy Friday afternoon. I'm glad to be joined by my colleagues from the FRC, and we're hoping that the panel will be as interactive as possible. So please do ask lots of questions and participate in the pulse survey as well. I joined the FRC in May, as Sally said, in a newly created role of Director of Stakeholder Engagement and Corporate Affairs. This role is responsible for stakeholder engagement, both in the UK and internationally, as well as public affairs and communications. We are building our stakeholder engagement strategy off the excellent work done to date with investors and many corporates, so we can continue to inform all of our work from standard setting through to corporate reporting, non-financial reporting, climate stewardship, ESG, and corporate governance. That's quite a list, and it does show you the span of the activities and responsibilities of the FRC. Looking back on the year to date at the FRC, as many of you will know, in February, we published our new strategy and purpose for 2020-2021 after positive responses to its consultation. Just to remind you that the strategy is of the FRC to promote a more resilient audit market and develop its longer-term strategy once the government has finalised its position on key public policy issues relating to the audit market. It's also important to remind you of our new-ish purpose. This purpose was set, as I said before, in February, serving the public interest by setting high standards of corporate governance, reporting and audit, and by holding to account those responsible for delivering them. To meet this, our core objectives are to set high standards in corporate governance and stewardship, corporate reporting, audit and actuarial work, and assess the effectiveness of the application of those standards, enforcing them proportionally where it is in the public interest. To promote improvements and innovation in these areas, exploring good practice with a wide range of stakeholders. And some of my colleagues on the panel will be talking about these later in the webinar. And to transform the organisation in a fit-for-purpose independent regulator known as AGA. Between them, the reviews by Sir John Kingman, the CMA, and Sir Donald Brydon created 155 recommendations for us to consider, spanning audit purpose and product, the audit market, and how audit is regulated. There's a great deal of complexity and overlap between these recommendations, and we've dealt with that by creating a program of 6 work streams, each focused on a different area of our remit. These are setting up the new regulator, audit scope and regulation, corporate regulation, corporate reporting, corporate governance, and market reform. Many of the recommendations require legislation, so we have been working alongside BEIS on detailed policy proposals for consultation. COVID-19 has understandably delayed this timetable slightly, as BEIS diverted its attention to supporting businesses through emergency legislation such as the Corporate Insolvency and Governance Act. However, since mid-July, we have been engaged in an intense period of policy development alongside BEIS, with the aim of creating a consultation for them to publish before the end of the year. That's been a highly collaborative exercise, as BEIS utilised the FRC's regulatory and technical expertise to craft proportionate policy proposals to put out for consultation. Within the various recommendations, there are a number of big ticket policy areas, such as expanding the definition of public interest entity to capture more companies, in particular large private ones. There's also the much debated proposal for a UK internal controls framework, much like the US Sarbanes-Oxley regulation. The FRC supports the expansion of the definition of PI, so that as the UK's audit reporting and governance regulator, we can focus on those companies which investors, wider stakeholders, and ultimately all of us as pension holders and savers have a vested interest in. The FRC also supports the creation of a new internal controls framework and holding executive directors to account for the internal control disclosures they make. We agree that some degree of assurance over these disclosures is also desirable. This consultation will be the next major milestone in our transformation journey. We anticipate that the consultation period will run for about 60 to 90 days and would strongly encourage anyone with an interest in audit reporting or corporate governance to respond to the consultation once it's published. We appreciate that many corporates are hard-pressed for both time and resources at the moment, and that these are extraordinary times. Consultation fatigue amongst you all is a real risk sometimes. So during the consultation period, there will be ample opportunities to engage with us or with BEIS in the way which suits you best. Every bit of feedback matters to us. So if you can't face responding to dozens of consultation questions, don't be concerned if you only want to focus on the ones that matter most to you. And those responses can be made formally in writing or via the many roundtables, webinars, and other activities we will be holding during the consultation period. Following consultation, there will need to be legislation, and I should point out that there is so much in this program, it would be unreasonable to expect AGA to implement all that change from day one. Instead, we should expect a phased implementation, with AGA likely to be established in early 2022, and any new requirements on companies, directors and auditors being delivered in a proportionate manner, which allows time for those impacted to plan and prepare. But of course, I should emphasise that everything I've said is subject to ministerial approval, the caveat which comes with the territory of working alongside government in developing policy, and never more so than during such a period of flux as we have seen over the preceding months. But I wouldn't want to give you the impression that all of the FRC's work has only been about the transformation program, key though this is to transforming into an even more effective regulator. Here's a few examples of some of the range of our activities in the last few months. The important work of our supervision and enforcement divisions continues, and we continue to engage with the audit firms to ensure that they focus on measures to deliver consistently high quality audit. This is vital to ensure confidence in the activities and ongoing viability of companies, particularly during these extraordinary times. Our annual AQR and AER reports showed the progress we have made and are making in both driving improvement in our audit quality and, where that doesn't happen, taking appropriate action. As the global pandemic hit, we were pleased to support corporates, auditors, and the markets generally with guidance and advice on going concern reporting in particular, as the full effects of the pandemic were felt in many sectors and individual companies. As the world turned virtual overnight, our corporate governance team supported the quick pivot to virtual AGMs by companies over the summer, and the feedback on all of our guidance was well received as supportive, speedy, and effective. The FRC provides secretariat support to the preemption group, who have been instrumental in guiding companies through these extraordinary times, as many refinance and recapitalize to meet the challenges that COVID has had on their capital positions in the short to medium term. We have also used our powers to grant a number of waivers to the non-audit services fee cap to allow auditors to support companies seeking to recapitalize or raise funds from the markets to strengthen their financial position. On Wednesday, we published the review of early reporting against the principles of the UK Stewardship Code, which analysed 21 responsible investment and active ownership stewardship reports and considered how well prospective signatories have addressed the standards set. Climate change is one of the defining issues of our time and, by its nature, material to companies' longer-term success. Boards of companies have a responsibility to consider their impact on the environment and the likely consequences of any business decisions in the long term, and it's clear that investors are increasingly becoming more interested in non-financial information. And as Deepa will cover later, we encourage companies to consider the broader matters that impact company performance over the longer term, including ESG. The FRC supports the development of standards for non-financial reporting, and we are investigating which frameworks it may be able to encourage companies to report against. We think that to provide the necessary information to investors and other capital providers, public interest entities should report against the TCFD 11 recommended disclosures, and with reference to their subsector, using the SASB framework. It's clear that the importance of the S in ESG has grown significantly in the eyes of stakeholders as a result of COVID-19. For those companies who have taken government loans or used the furlough scheme, the social contract between them and the public has changed, and companies should disclose information about the nature of any government-backed support by country and any conditions that attach to this support. Companies need to disclose how they protect key drivers of value, including details of the likely impact of shorter-term decisions on a company's key assets and longer-term drivers of value, for example, people, brands, licenses. My colleagues on the panel will be speaking more about some of the other various initiatives and reports that the FRC is undertaking and has done, so I won't steal their thunder by going through some of them now. However, it's clear that the pandemic has put the spotlight firmly on so many of the elements of trust in society, and especially in relation to trust and confidence in business and its advisors. Today's webinar focuses on corporate reporting and corporate governance, and clearly through many of our consultations with stakeholders in the past months, the issue of confidence in both the economic prospects of a company and its governance has never been higher. The pandemic has turned a new lens on how companies treat all of their stakeholders, not just investors, but employees, their supply chain, and customers. So more consistent and transparent reporting sets the tone for more meaningful engagement and will build trust. But that trust has to be built on actions, not just words and promises. I'll stop there and happy to take questions through Sally before passing over to Phil, David, and Deepa to take you through their work. Thanks very much.
Super. That was a really wonderful overview. So what I wanted to do first is to end the poll and show you the results of the poll, because some of them actually tie into some of the things that you were saying. So the first question we asked was, how would you classify your company's approach to reporting? And I think this is a really interesting one, because this is one that we tracked over the years. And what we're seeing increasingly year on year is more companies really trying to communicate greater insights about their company and also use it as a communications opportunity for wider stakeholders. So I think that's a really positive, that's a increase from last year. The question on purpose, and I want to quiz you a little bit about your own purpose in a minute, which I think is really interesting, but this is very top of the agenda right now. So we're seeing majority of people say that it's very important to have a clear purpose. And then whether companies have a clearly defined purpose, this is where we see some of the challenges with some of the organizations that we're working with, is actually really bringing that purpose to life. So one of the things that I wanted to do with this question is I wanted to ask, what is that purpose really beginning to inform? So I'm delighted actually that so many people are saying that their purpose does inform their strategy, so it provides a North Star for whether they do something or don't do something. But what actually was a little bit interesting is when you go down this chart, the measurement and incentives. So I really think that purpose needs to link right through to performance and remuneration. So I think that's really the struggle that organizations are having right now. So it would be interesting. Did you have any thoughts on those polling questions, Kate, that you wanted to add to that?
I mean, I think it's a very interesting mix. I think there is a mix, and we have to be honest about this, that some companies look at the communications of some of these issues as, shall we call them, a slightly marketing campaign for their company and their processes and the way they look at the world. But I don't think that's enough anymore. And I'm just looking at some of those statistics. Some people have said it's a communications opportunity. Other people are saying, it is important. I think on purpose, there's probably, and David's maybe better position to answer this from the corporate governance perspective. But I think it's interesting that purpose has become a bit of a word of du jour. And I think that's great if people are actually linking the purpose to strategy and actions, and in some cases, performance and pay. And I think just saying a purpose that doesn't link to anything is being seen through by investors and other commentators as nice to have, but what does it actually mean and how are you demonstrating it? I think there's a lot, this has been the year of an incredible amount of flux and change, lots of societal-led anger and around particular issues. And I think companies have reacted, across a range of either that slightly, purpose washing exercise through to really being able to demonstrate how it's linked to the strategy and the way the business operates. But that's a very wide spectrum. And I think some people are still kind of making up their minds how they're going to link that purpose to really make it come alive through actions. I don't know if you wanted to add anything to that, David, particularly around the pay and performance issues.
Thanks, Kate. I was going to come right on to purpose in my presentation, and I have to say that that actually that doesn't seem to be playing out in the reporting that we're seeing when it comes to purpose. I would agree with you there. I think people are possibly putting a lot of effort in and think that they're telling that they're linking purpose with actions and with the strategies that supports that. But I don't think it's yet coming through in the reporting. On a brighter note, we have seen an improvement in reporting on remuneration because the way that the new code changed was to link it more with the regulatory requirements. So we've seen some better reporting there.
Okay, so let me go back to some of your opening comments, Kate, in terms of things. And one of the things that you mentioned, and actually it was one of the things I picked up on, and Fiona Robertson's picked up on it as a question. We've recently had an announcement, a statement of intent to work together by the 5 main sustainability and ESG reporting bodies, organizations. And I think in your comments, you said that you were recommending that companies report TCFD and then use on TCFD recommendations, but also use SASB's framework. Is that what you were suggesting? So
I think we're working with other regulators and departments to build the approach. But our initial thoughts on this are it's more likely to be around that approach. But there's such a momentum building on standards, and we're welcoming this opportunity for so many voices to be heard on this, because at the moment, there are different views across the table. We want to play a helpful role in setting the direction of travel in the UK. So working with them on discussions on Bryden, future of corporate reporting, and I don't want to steal Deepa's thunder here because I know she's covering some of this stuff in her presentation as well, and involvement in the TCFD task force. But we are part of the conversation and we have our views, but I don't think it would be fair for us to be dominating at this point what other people can bring to the table and around that framework discussion that's ongoing at the moment. But our initial thinking is around those type of, is that approach, the SASB framework. But as I say, I'm nervous because I feel like I stole a bit of David's thunder on the purpose stuff, so I don't want to go too deeply into it if Deepa's going to carry this a bit more.
That's fine. So just in terms of timing then, I mean, you outlined a little bit of that, but in terms of timing and impact on corporates of some of these initiatives and the move towards, when do you think we'll see, begin to feel some of that?
I mean, I think, as I said, obviously we're working very hard with BAYS, and naturally, given some of the impacts of the pandemic on timing, we would look to be seen to consult generally and widely towards the end of this year. It is a lot. I mean, I outlined those groups that's covering a large framework of actions and policies, and you saw the kind of breadth of that consultation. So as I said in my opening remarks, that's not going to be on everyone's high list of priorities to consult on, but we are encouraging people to get as involved as they can be, because the more information and the more interaction with our stakeholders to comment on the proposals of the consultation document will be important. So we would be seeing in the next few months that becoming available for consultation.
Okay, so in terms of from a corporate perspective, then, what would be the kind of key issues that you want them to take away back to their boards around where the FRC is going and the direction of travel? What should be the things that they should be focusing on in terms of priorities?
Well, I mean, I think across the piece, I'd be interested if Phil and David want to add to this. I mean, audit reform is important, not just for audit committees, not just for the CFO of companies. It's important to establish confidence and trust in well-functioning companies who are transparent and open in how they operate, which they're running their internal control. So, reform is very important for everyone in every company. It relates specifically on a day-to-day basis. That the other, well, like the transparency and better corporate reporting, to communicate with stakeholders to help them understand the direction of travel of companies, but also these non-financial matters is going to become more key, not just because we've had the year we've had so far in 2020, but because that is a right way in which stakeholders can look at companies and their performance, the way in which they're treating all of their stakeholders while delivering against their strategic objectives. Phil, did you want to come in, or am I stealing any of your thunder? I don't want to do that.
No, I completely agree with you. I think there's a rising demand for information on non-financial reporting matters, and I think that is because it gives stakeholders, investors, and other stakeholders an indication of how the company is building value in the future. I mean, particularly in the current crisis, investors and other stakeholders are looking to see how companies are responding to the challenges relating to the workforce, to how we're tackling climate change, and on all those other things. Not just because there's a societal demand for that kind of information, but also it's useful to understand how the company is responding to to some of these challenges and risks, and how that's going to build value and promote the success of the company in the long term. So I think that's a really important area for corporate reporting going forward.
And just to pick up on that and some of your earlier comments, Kate, about, I guess, the FRC's purpose, which is much wider, I suppose, or it seems much wider from the purpose than it was before, in terms of public interest entity for the interest of all stakeholders almost. Do you believe that you're, in terms of this focus in this debate between stakeholder capitalism versus shareholder capitalism, where do you sit on that sort of spectrum in terms of how we need to be communicating and addressing stakeholders?
Well, I mean, I think it's clear that it comes well, just saying that you're doing it for return just isn't going to cut it anymore across any markets-driven economy. I mean, there's just too many stakeholders across the piece that probably 10 years ago didn't make it onto the way in which companies described how they did things. I mean, I've been in the markets for long enough to remember that, annual report and accounts looked at the accounts and talked about the drivers of value economically. They didn't talk about things like employees, employee engagement, supply chain, environment. Now, that just shows, how much we've evolved and how much things have moved on. But I do think there is ever more, and this isn't just because of the ESG investing lens. I just think everybody involved with companies, is going to be under more scrutiny to explain and show how they're treating all the stakeholders, not just looking at the financial return. And people will debate that with me, and I know some fund managers out there who would say no, our clients just want to find out about return. But at the end of the day, I think the move to more and more people wanting to see ESG embedded in an investment process, I don't think that that's the way of the future. It may reflect some of the past and where we are at the in between, as you said, those two kind of parts of the viewpoint between stakeholder capitalism and it's all about profit. But I think as we move into the future, I can't see that continuing to be a strongly held view.
Okay, that's helpful. And a question from one of the attendees is, who does the FRC consider as its key stakeholders?
Well, we don't see. We like to think all of our stakeholders are balanced. We look at our stakeholder universe in the following way. We see obviously the audit firms, corporates, asset owners, fund managers, obviously our own employees. Our relationships with government are very important, particularly as we are a partner body to BEIS. We want to have good relationships and strong, meaningful relationships with other regulators, because they inform as much our universe as we do to theirs. And I think we've got things like index providers, we've got NGOs, we've got think tanks, societal groups, things like the proxy advisors and proxy voting. That it is very wide, but obviously the probably key groups would be corporates, users of corporate reporting, auditors, investors, and asset owners would, if you looked at the core, would be where we would have to operate.
Okay, there's one more question before we move on to Deepa. It's a question about internal audit's role. And the question is, how do you see internal audit's role changing with the transformation program? Are you able to give some color on that?
Yeah, I mean, the internal audit role differs from company to company. I think that's fair to say. I think different companies have it embedded in different ways in their internal controls, but it's obviously a key part of the internal control environment for companies. And as part of the internal control framework, as we consider it, as we transform to AGA, their role is very, very important.
Okay, super. Well, thanks, Kate. Now, there'll be time for questions at the end with all of the FRC, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to move on to introduce Deepa. who is the Director of Narrative Reporting at the FRC. Deepa's been working on a project on the future of corporate reporting for quite some time. She shared a little bit about it with us last year, and I believe actually we're very lucky because a lot of the FRC's reports and reviews will be coming out in the next few weeks, as I understand. So hopefully we'll get a bit of a preview as to what that might contain. So Deepa, I hand over to you, please.
Thanks very much, Sally, and I'm delighted to be here again. As Sally mentioned, I'm very pleased to be able to say that we'll be issuing the consultation paper on the future of corporate reporting next week. So this is a bit of a flavour of what's coming up in that document. So just to recap, this is very much a thought leadership piece from the Financial Reporting Council. So its aim is not in the first instance to set regulation or set regulatory requirements, although this might be something that evolves in the future. This is really thinking about the 5 to 10 year vision for corporate reporting. And we've developed this paper really to start the debate and the discussion and share some ideas that we've been thinking about. And again, as the project develops, as the consultation paper comes out, we'll be seeking sort of lots of views from different stakeholders and very much welcome company input into this. So one of the key starting points for this project was for us to consider, what do we actually mean by corporate reporting and how are we defining that in today's world? So we've basically adopted a very broad definition of corporate reporting, which covers the suite of corporate communications that a company produces. It's not just about investor-focused reporting. We are looking to build a model that accommodates the interests of a wider group of stakeholders. And as Kate has mentioned, this is an area which is developing, evolving, and we really need to develop non-financial reporting so it is on the same level playing field as financial reporting has been in the past. So that's one of the key themes in this paper. The other key element, and really what we call the centerpiece of our model, is this idea of a reporting network, which is on the right-hand side of the screen. And what we're looking to do is unbundle the existing annual report. So when I've presented at various events on corporate reporting, annual reporting, I'm still getting the feedback to say that annual reports are too long, too impenetrable. They're confused about the purpose and the audience. And this is sort of driven by a number of things. So it is increasing regulation. It's difficulties in implying materiality, a lot of pressure to provide a lot of information in one document. So what we are proposing is this idea of a reporting network, which at its core has something called the business report. And this business report looks very much like a concise strategic report with a primary financial statement. So we're not looking to lose things that are good and things that are working well, but we're trying to distribute them in a more effective way. So we have the business report, which is supported by a series of network reports. So you would still see the financial statements there, but they wouldn't necessarily be part of the business report. Again, you'd expect to see disclosures around sustainability. Some of those might be in the business report, as you see in the strategic report today. Other more expansive disclosures might be produced elsewhere. So this is the idea here. We're also thinking about how in a technology-enabled world, this model could be digitalized. So we're not thinking paper first, we're thinking about an electronic version which is connected through technology. So although you may have different reports, we expect there to be some sort of connectivity between them. So that's really the key idea. And we're thinking of this as a system that applies. So as part of this system, you have your suite of corporate reports that form part of the reporting network, and those are underpinned by consistent principles. So what we would say is these principles are fairly simple. So, for example, we say that there must be connectivity between the various reports in your reporting network. All the reports in your network should be accessible. So has everyone got equal access to those reports on the website? Can there be a standardized index page on a company's websites where you can access these different reports? So those are some of the ideas that we're putting forward. So you have a common set of principles that apply to corporate reporting as a whole. And the way we see these as evolving is really best practice principles. So we already have some communication principles in the strategic report guidance. These would be similar. So it's almost like this part of the principles that you have, you could almost apply them now as best practice. So that's sort of some of the thinking that's around there, and the key focus of the paper. I just want to do a little bit of a dive into non-financial reporting. So in the paper, the paper itself covers this range of themes that are shown on this slide. We have drawn out non-financial reporting, and that's not to say that non-financial reporting is something separate in this model, but it's just that we want to explore how this model could apply to non-financial reporting given its significance. So there have been past developments in non-financial reporting. So last year I was speaking about the update to the guidance on the strategic report, which incorporates the EU non-financial reporting directive, as well as the Section 172 requirement. And both of those things started the journey. So they started the discussion on thinking about the broader matters that impact company performance over the longer term. This paper is really looking at the future of non-financial reporting and where that might go. And certainly over the last 6 months, this is a debate that is accelerating extremely fast at a rapid pace. And what we're seeing is greater calls for standardization of this information from investors. At the same time, we've spoken to companies, and what I hear is there is confusion in terms of the vast number of frameworks out there. We are seeing some alignment in terms of the IMP work. But earlier this week, we also saw a major step in terms of the IFRS Foundation is also thinking about whether it sets up a sustainability standards board to set international standards. Where the FRC is in this debate is we absolutely support this standardization of this information. We believe that the long-term solution is definitely a international standard setter. Having said that, I've been in accounting standard setting for some time, and these things take a very long time to develop. And so in order to be responsive to calls from investors for more consistent, comparable information in this area, we believe that there needs to be movement on this a lot quicker. So we have the TCFD, which is the established framework for climate-related reporting, which we encourage companies to report against. The SASB is also the standard setter, which is very sort of involved in these discussions. So whether it's through the Impact Management Project, any future developments by the International Financial Reporting Standards Foundation would be on that, around that table. So we very much support and encourage companies to think about reporting against the SASB framework for their metrics. So I think those themes are picked up in the paper. At the same time, we are on the future of corporate reporting. We are thinking about the whole idea of kind of sustainability reporting, whether more information is required in this space. And we're exploring an idea about a public interest report. Here, essentially what we're saying is companies are doing a fantastic job of producing voluntary sustainability reports. Is there a need for some sort of standardization regulation around this information so that there is a level playing field? And so we're exploring this idea of whether you need a separate public interest report as part of the reporting network. And that's something we would really welcome views from companies on as part of the consultation response. So those are really the key elements of what we're working on. And there is a lot coming out externally in this space, as well as some FRC movement. So we have the publication of the Future of Corporate Reporting consultation next week. At the end of October, we also expect to be able to publish our climate thematic review, which is from our corporate reporting review team and audit quality review teams who have looked at how companies and auditors are thinking about climate related reporting and the audit thereon. So there's some various connected issues and some ideas on how other companies are reporting against these at the moment. So with that, I will hand over to Sally for questions, but again, very much looking forward to your comments and feedback on this paper.
Perfect. Okay, so report, we should all look out for it next week, but I can't believe everybody on the line. I've got over 200 of you on this call and I don't have any questions. I've got so many questions for Deepa right now. I'm going to kick off then. So just in terms of, if we just step back to the future of corporate reporting, you talked about, I think you called it a business report. Is that what you called it? And how is that similar or different to what we currently have in terms of the strategic report? Because it sounds like the business report, for those of us that have been in this game for a long time, it sounds like the old annual review that we had many years ago, targeted at the smaller shareholders with the condensed sort of cash flow and profit and loss. Is that what I'm understanding? And I guess the question is, can you clarify how similar or different it is to what we have currently?
Yeah, so I think it would be very similar to the strategic report and certainly have the principles that we have in the strategic report. So, for example, reporting on business model, strategy, risks. And Sally, like you say, we had the summary financial statements in the past. And so we would attach those to the strategic report as part of the business report. In terms of my experience over the last few years, is that I think there is the main difference that we'd like to see is this being a much more concise, streamlined document. So the FRC last year held a series of citizens' juries, which invited members of the public to give some views on annual reporting. And interestingly, the feedback was consistent from other stakeholders that we hear from, that the annual report is very sort of difficult to understand, partly because of the volume of information that's in there. So really what we're trying to achieve with a business report is obtain a very sort of slimline document.
Okay. And just in terms of your vision for this, in terms of oversight, I mean, one of the key benefits of the annual report, as we know, is the oversight from the board that it's supposed to have. Do you envision oversight across all of those, that network, I think, or ecosystem of reporting that you were talking about, or how does that work?
Absolutely. And so the idea would be that the board would oversee all the reports that are part of this reporting network and take responsibility for them as a whole package. So I think at the moment we are in a situation where either through regulation or voluntary regimes, each report is looked at individually on a piecemeal basis, and we want to try and draw it all together.
Okay, super. And then when you mentioned at the end, you mentioned a public interest report. What would that entail? What do you envision that to be?
So we expect that would look something like an expanded Section 172 statement, so including more detailed information on employee matters, suppliers, customers that are relevant to the company. I think this, again, is sort of in the interest of keeping the business report concise. We're sort of looking at a number of principles for various network reports, including providing more detailed information. And we're also looking to house some of the public policy information that you have now, so the gender pay gap reporting. So at the moment, again, these are all dealt with as very individual, separate reports. So can we have a report that brings all these elements together?
Okay, good. Okay, I've spurred on a couple of questions here, which is great. One of the questions, you might have answered a bit there, but while environmental reporting has become much more advanced, there's great difficulty in reporting against some of the social objectives. How do you see reporting evolve to address a company's progress in addressing the interests of society? Is that what you see that public interest report doing then?
So yes, over the longer term, I agree with the person who raised the question. I think we are seeing this as a bit of a journey. So I think there are things that are easy to measure and relate to the company's activities. So if I use the language of the non-financial reporting directive, any impacts that the company causes to the external environment, those are more easy to translate. We've been thinking about the sustainable development goals and how a company might report against those. And we think there needs to be more development in the thinking in this area, because it's very hard to say, for example, a company may overall make a contribution to reducing poverty, for example, but it is very difficult to make that link. And from a company perspective, I'd imagine that's quite hard to do.
Okay, there's a couple that helpful. There's a couple of questions in here about timing. So do you expect that all these different aspects of the reporting network to come out at the same time or throughout the year? And then another question about, are the FRC trying to increase or reduce the burden for companies, given that there will presumably be a requirement to file an annual report with audited financial statements as well?
Yeah. So if I take the first question, so how we see the reporting network developing is something that has a mixture of mandatory and voluntary reports. And we believe that some of the reports should continue to be published on an annual periodic reporting cycle. So, for example, we illustrate that the business report and the financial statements network report should be published at the same time, similarly to how you would publish the annual report. The other reports in the network wouldn't be bound by that same time period, because, again, the model would accommodate half yearly and other types of reports or other voluntary reports that a company might produce.
Okay, super. Okay, so that's helpful. I had a question just before we move on to David, because I'm just conscious of time. And it was about the comment about TCFD, reporting against the TCFD recommendations, and then SASB. In terms of timing, were you expecting companies to begin to adopt SASB, address that in this year's reporting cycle, or is this just something that they should be sort of get onto the horizon as things develop with this wider group around standardized?
I would say this is not sort of for immediate. It's something they would encourage companies to start thinking about, and how they report against it. Again, sort of from an FRC perspective, there is at the moment, whether through company law or standards, there is no regulatory underpinning requirement for this. The FCA is consulting on a comply or explain basis for TCFD reporting, but we think that is all good practice, and we'd encourage companies to start thinking about that now.
Okay, so lots for us to think about, and I think everybody needs to look at the consultation when it comes out next week, because there'll be lots of questions. Deepa, that's great. Well, what I'm going to do is Linda, if you could launch the next poll, and then I'm going to pass over to David to talk to us a little bit about corporate governance and stewardship. And those of you on the call, if you wouldn't mind filling out the polling questions at the same time, and maybe we'll try to pick them up after David's shared his views. Thank you, David.
Thank you very much, Sally. It's great to be with you. It is really a very dreary Friday afternoon. Nothing like a bit of corporate reporting, governance and stewardship to brighten things up. I only have one slide, and this is more of an aid memoir for me, to tell you what we've been up to in my team. As some of you will have noticed, the team has expanded quite significantly. So I've been very fortunate to promote Maureen Beresford as head of corporate governance, and appoint Claudia Chapman as head of stewardship, and they have their own teams now. However, we work very, very closely together because the whole linkage between corporate governance and stewardship is, of course, is very, very strong. So everything we're doing is I hope coherent and coordinated, and I'll be telling you what we've been doing this year. Now, we start off with AGMs. And this is an extra project that we've decided to do, and the reasons I think will be obvious to most of you listening. Lockdown and the various restrictions that took place meant that you will have noticed that you couldn't hold AGMs in the traditional format that was expected. And I really want to recognise the difficulties that companies and company secretaries in particular faced. Some really trying circumstances out there. You had to adapt. You had to adapt very quickly. I think, largely speaking, you did so successfully. Had to undo arrangements in many cases that had already been made, and reorganise things in a way that had not been reorganised before. We, as you well know, the FRC joined up with BEIS. We joined up with Institute of Chartered Secretaries and Administrators, the Governance Institute, to provide some guidance, and ultimately BEIS brought in changes in legislation, which I hope you all found helpful. But we thought it was an opportunity to look at AGMs this year, look at what happened. But not just look back, but look forward as well, because clearly the AGM is a very important institution. It's the one time of the year when the shareholders are in the same room as the directors, particularly. So that's particularly true for retail shareholders. We wanted to look at how the AGMs worked in lockdown, but we also wanted to look to the future, what are necessary, because that model. Whether we were in the middle of a pandemic or whether we're not in the middle of a pandemic, that model is possibly dated, and we need to see how we can move on. And in recognising what company secretaries had to do, we also saw, of course, there's no one size fits all when it comes to when it comes to governance, and there's no one size fits all when it comes to an AGM either. You've got different companies of different sizes, different size shareholder base, different nature of shareholder base. You have to take all of those into account when you're arranging and holding an AGM. Clearly, most of the nearly all of the AGMs over the season were closed meetings, but there were varying degrees of openness when it comes to engaging with shareholders, particularly when it comes to questioning the board, giving out information and receiving information, and how you actually vote at the meeting. And we saw some excellent practice, particularly those companies had a bit more time to prepare, using technology to make that happen. We were very pleased to see that. So what we're going to be doing within the next 2 or 3 weeks, can't be too precise about this at the minute, is to produce a report on what we found, looking at the actual AGM season, looking at good practice, looking at where practice could be improved, recommending before we think further about what companies should think about when it comes to AGMs while these restrictions continue. And clearly in the future we could. Some companies, as I said, there's no one size fits all. So companies some may wish to return to the more traditional AGM. Some will be looking at wholly virtual AGMs with the large use of technology, and of course, there's always the option to have a hybrid AGM as well. And we will be working with BEIS and other organisations as well to think about the AGM of the future and whether, in fact, we need legislative changes and whether we need code changes to support those. So look out for more about that, because that's going to be a big theme of next year. Now, moving on to the Corporate Governance Code, as most of you will know, this will be the first year that we see full reporting on what we call the new Corporate Governance Code, actually dated 2018, but it seems to be hanging around for a while. And you will remember that last year we put out a short report on some initial reporting that we'd seen. Now, I have to be frank here, in contrast to the very positive efforts that we saw when it came to AGMs, I was expecting to be better impressed about reporting on corporate governance this year, given the amount of consultation that had taken place and given the long lead in time. I suspect that's a very British way of saying we were a little bit disappointed, I have to say. There were some bright spots and some companies made some really good efforts. And we've talked about remuneration, where we saw some excellent reporting on remuneration, which was very helpful, and properly linking remuneration to incentivization, which was very good. But, and I just go back to Kate on this one, you didn't steal my thunder at all, Kate, because I think it's worth reiterating this point about purpose. We did remark last year that when it comes to purpose, too much of talking about purpose was using marketing slogans, not thinking about the real purpose of the company, and in fact not linking purpose to the supporting pillars such as strategy, such as culture. You have to have the right strategy and the right culture that are going to support your purpose. I would say that I think what we've been through during the last 6 months and what we continue to go through has made a lot of companies think about this more in depth. There's a lot of good work going on out there about defining purpose and thinking about purpose. And I would point people, for example, to the work of Professor Colin Mayer at the Saïd Business School and with the British Academy. But I should point out other academics are available. But there is some excellent work going on. There's a strong link here with Section 172. Now, clearly, that section, the reporting on directors' duties, and in particular, Section 172 comes through in the strategic report, but we reference it now in the corporate governance code. And the reason that we reference it is because it's important when it comes to risk, and it's important when it comes to the connection to stakeholders as well, and the director's duties when it comes to talking to and receiving information from and engaging effectively with a wide range of stakeholders. And again, that type of reporting, we would say, is, to be polite, rather still in development, I think. What we really need to see is not simply how it works in practice, but what the end result is. Process is good because, as I said, one size doesn't fit all, and different companies are going to engage in different ways with different sets of stakeholders. But we really need to see how it actually works, what messages the company is receiving, and how that affects board decision making. And the same, I would say, goes when it comes to workforce engagement as well. As you will know, there was one of the major changes in the code was workforce engagement, how the board engages with the workforce, how it receives messages, what it does with that information, how it changes, how that may change decision making. And again, on that latter point, when it comes to activities and outcomes, we weren't receiving as much information as we wanted to receive. And that phrase, activities and outcomes, is a phrase that we're using increasingly when it comes to the stewardship code, which I'm going to finish off with very shortly. That the issue that we had with the stewardship code was that there was some fine reporting on policies and on good intentions, but we weren't seeing what the results of good stewardship was, what took place, and what the objectives were, what took place, and what the outcomes were. And I think we're going to have to see a lot more of that when it comes to corporate governance code reporting as well. And again, later in the year, I've trailed a few of the, I've just trailed a few of the messages that we're putting forward. But later in the year, we will be producing our annual review of corporate governance code reporting. And that's the kind of information that you will see. As most of you know, I'll just move on to research reports, actually. We have 4 research reports in train, which help and support the work that we've done on corporate governance code reporting. We have research reports currently, which is working with our research department and academia and other organisations. We have research reports underway on remuneration reporting, on workforce engagement, on career progression for LGBTQI representatives in the workplace. And we also have another research report going on. This is one we're particularly interested in, on diversity in the boardroom, but not quantity, but quality, in terms of what does diversity bring in terms of boardroom discussion and quality of decision making. We thought we'd tackle something more qualitative than quantitative and see what that brought for us. So all of this work that we're doing through our research department and with academia and others, we will be publishing over the next 6 months or so. Onto the weights principles. We're responsible for the weights principles, which of course the principles for corporate governance in large private companies. And many of those companies have taken advantage of the late filing, the relaxation for late filing. So that work has been slightly postponed. This, of course, the first year that those companies reported on the weights principles. It may well we have to do that in 2 tranches, because of course we have the calendar and the end of March year end. So we will be looking there. We reckon there's around 1,700 of those companies. There's a great mix of companies. Of course, there's family companies and there's subsidiaries and there are other types of companies. So we need to look at the types of reporting that's going on, because of course the weights principles are not compulsory. They're a helpful set of principles that enables the private companies to produce a corporate governance statement as per the legislation that was put in place a year or 2 ago. Finally, on the stewardship code, some of you will have seen the press notice that came out a couple of days ago. Early reporting on the stewardship code. So investors being put, when it comes to reporting on the quality of their stewardship, under the spotlight, in the same way that companies have been put under the spotlight over a number of years. We've been looking at early reporting. The deadlines for investors to report on stewardship are not until next year. So the deadline is the 31st of March next year for effectively an application to be a signatory to the stewardship code, and we'll make the decisions of who can be a signatory and who hasn't met the grade. We'll make those in the second quarter of next year. But we had some early reporting on the stewardship code, and we put out a publication on that, so there can be no question about the type, the level, the type, and the level of quality of reporting that we'll require. Again, we saw some bright spots, but we're keen that those who submit a stewardship statement next year obviously report on all of the principles of stewardship. And again, focusing on activities, on outcomes. Statements about good intentions, statements about principles are all well and good, but we really need to see what stewardship involves and what the outcomes were. And actually, that report does include some really quite useful examples of engagement as well, and that's the kind of thing that we're wanting to see. So, look, I hope that is a good overview of the work that we're doing. Clearly, this is going to continue into next year. We will always be producing our annual reviews when it comes to stewardship and reporting, but we've effectively what's been happening over the past 6 months, the pandemic has enabled us to expand and actually look at more other issues such as AGMs and expand our research base of information as well. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Super, David. Thank you for that. There are a couple questions, and I've just shared the polling results, which I think probably reflect some of what you were saying. So, large number of people in terms of their approach this year, reporting more on stakeholder engagement, and we'll have to address the role of the board. And maybe could you just give a couple of real practical sort of feedback or advice on what companies could do better in terms of reporting on Section 172 and what is best in class? That's one of the questions.
Okay. We will deal with that in the actual report itself. But as a specific answer to the question, I can't give you an example off the top of my head. But one of the things one of the many things that's happened in the pandemic is that companies have actually been able to focus on who their most important stakeholders are, and companies have to think about their position. They have to think about the market they're in. They have to think about the variety of stakeholders that are included when you think about the matters that directors have to take into account when they're delivering their duty under Section 172. Someone asked earlier on, Kate, how will we prioritise our stakeholders? And I think that's possibly the similar way I'm answering the question. Companies need to prioritise their stakeholders and think about it in that way. But we will be able to give some examples when we produce our report.
Fabulous. Okay, so that will be coming out soon to look out for. So what I'll do then is there are a couple of more specific questions, but I think we'll go to Phil, and then maybe we'll pick up questions at the end, so we make sure that we have time. So Phil, could I welcome you to give an update on all the work that you guys have been up to at the lab and some of your future projects, please?
Yeah, certainly. So good afternoon, everyone. I'm delighted to be here. I think this is my fourth year in a row, Sally. Thank you very much for inviting me back again and for this great session. I remember when I first spoke about the lab 3 years ago. The two things I was talking about then were risk reporting, viability statements, and then separately technology. And my goodness, aren't they relevant topics for today's environment? I certainly think over the last 3 or 4 years, the focus on risk and viability statements and getting companies to think about the different scenarios they might face and how they can respond to that has been so important over the last few months. Granted that not many principal risk disclosures would have had pandemic on it, certainly before December last year. But I think the improvement in risk processes and the process of doing a viability statement where you're thinking of different scenarios, how you're going to respond on that, how you're going to maintain your liquidity, in response to a risk has really helped through this crisis. And technology, we wouldn't be here, Sally, if we didn't have technology to help us. But I think we're increasingly seeing in corporate communications the use of technology. It's not just a paper-based annual report anymore. It's very much communicating in very different ways. And Sally, I know Black Sun are very much in the forefront there. Of course, we're also moving from the paper-based document of the annual report to a digital report in years to come. Now, I'll mention that in a moment, because of course the FCA are consulting on delaying the implementation of the European single electronic format by 1 year. But nevertheless, a more digital annual report, as also envisaged in the Future of Corporate Reporting project that Deepa spoke about earlier, it is definitely on its way. But anyway, I don't want to take too long on the Financial Reporting Lab, but I did just want to run through our sort of recent work. Of course, the lab is not a regulatory part of the FRC. What the lab focuses on is best practices in reporting. And what we try and do is, as much as possible, is give really practical, real life examples of good practices in reporting. Over the summer period, as many of you will know, and I've spoken about this on Black Sun events in the past, but over the summer period, we produced two reports entitled Reporting in Times of Uncertainty in Response to COVID-19. And those two reports covered two areas of reporting which were specifically relevant at this time of crisis. The first report set out some good practice disclosures around going concern, risk reporting, and viability statements, and includes a number of practical examples of how those parts of the annual report can be best set out. The second report focused more on regular trading updates and market updates to the market, rather than focusing on annual or interim reports. And that set out some examples of companies that have responded well or reported well as to how they've responded to the crisis. And the three areas that we particularly heard from investors that they're looking for companies to focus on in their reporting are around resources, around the actions they're taking, and around the future. So if I take each of those in turn, resources is very much all about the cash the company has, its liquidity, how can it survive in the short term with a potential downturn in its income. So very much sort of investors were very interested, particularly the early stages of the pandemic, about how companies were maintaining their liquidity, maintaining their balance sheet. And one of the things that we highlighted in our report is actually last year we did a report on reporting on the sources and uses of cash, and that set out some good examples. We didn't know the pandemic was coming at that point, but it set out some good examples of how companies report on, what are the sources of cash they get, and how are they using that cash, whether it's capital expenditure or whether it's to maintain its balance sheet, pay a dividend, or whatever it is. So that was actually quite a relevant report, even though we didn't realize that COVID-19 was going to have quite the impact that it's had. So that's the first sort of part of the guidance was around resources. The second sort of thing was investors are really looking to understand what actions the company is taking in response to the pandemic. So that might be actions in terms of its dividend policy. It might be actions in terms of its workforce, whether it's accessing government schemes around furloughing and other government schemes, or any other action that the company is taking to deal with the pandemic. And then the third area was looking to the future, and increasingly investors are telling us once they've understood the short-term viability of companies, what they really want to understand is how companies are now positioning themselves for the future. And we've had a few comments on this webinar already from Kate and David, and some of the questions coming through about companies going back to their purpose. And actually, COVID-19 and the need to rethink or relook at company business models has perhaps we've heard from many companies that they've gone back and looked at their purpose and seeing that some of the actions they're taking to position the company for the future in line with that purpose. Does the purpose need to change? Does it need to adapt? So it's a real opportunity, I think, to look at purpose. And of course, the other key thing around the future is how you've dealt with your stakeholders, how you've dealt with the supply chain, how you've considered the workforce, and how you're positioning the company to be sustainable into the future. So those were really the three areas that we focused on. Now, we also referenced in that report back to some other work that we've that we did around climate and workforce, and clearly those are two areas of importance, particularly for that third thing around the future. We published a report on climate change disclosures last year, and then early this year on workforce-related disclosures, both areas that the FRC is very much focused on. We are doing a bigger report on climate. The FRC is doing a bigger report on climate, which should come out at the end of next month, which is looking at the extent to which companies, auditors, the professions, etc., are dealing with this, with the challenge of climate change in the work that they're doing. So that will be coming out shortly as well. So those are kind of the recent work that the lab has been doing. As I say, all of those reports are available for you to have a look at, freely available for you to have a look at on our website. They're packed full of lots of practical examples of companies putting into place good practice areas. And then in terms of the ongoing lab projects, which you're all very, very welcome, and I hope you would like to get involved. Many of you may already be involved with. We are continuing our work on technology. The European Single Electronic Format, as I say, the FCA are consulting on delaying the implementation of that. Some of you may be cheering in the audience. Some of you may be thinking, oh no, I really wanted to implement it this year. But that's being consulted on at the moment. The lab will continue to provide practical guidance around this. We've sort of held back this year, or certainly over the summer period, while the FCA are consulting on the delay, but we'll continue to provide practical guidance on how to implement that going forward. We're also very shortly about to issue a report on the use of video, again, very timely, with the increasing use of video in corporate communications. And that also, just feeding on some of the things that David talked about, is going to illustrate some good practices in the use of virtual AGMs. We've got some good examples of companies who have used virtual AGMs and dealt with investor questions and so forth. So that report should be coming out very shortly. The second sort of major project that we're looking at is around stakeholder reporting and Section 172 reporting. We've had a fantastic response to our call for participants in that. We've got over 50 companies participating in that project, many of which may be here on this webinar. So thank you again for participating in that. We're going to issue a very short set of tips next week, or sorry, not next week, the week after next, on the Section 172 statement specifically, which hopefully will help with the December year-end Section 172 statement reporting. And then the other major project that we are doing, and this really feeds off the work that we've done in the past around risk and viability, is a project around risks, uncertainties, and scenario reporting. And I must say, in the polling question, I was delighted to see so many more companies thinking about scenario analysis, thinking about reporting on scenario analysis, because that's really what investors are telling us it is important, particularly in the current environment. As I say, all our project reports can be found at our publication page, so do go and have a look. Packed with practical examples, some of which some companies might be here. Please take a virtual bow if you are. But there's lots of practical advice and guidance in those reports. So do take a look at our publication page. And as ever, if you would like to get involved in our projects, please do email us at the email address here. What we seek to do in the lab is we seek to express the views of participants in our projects. It's not a regulatory view or even it's not a regulatory view. It's the views of participants in our projects, both companies, investors, and other stakeholders. So the more participation and views that we get, the better for our projects. That was a very quick whistle-stop tour. I'm sorry it was quite so quick, but hopefully that gives you a flavour of what the lab is up to at the moment.
Great, Phil, thanks. Super overview of everything going on and lots to look out for. A couple of questions that have come up that I just thought I would try to squeeze in. Lots of questions around COVID and what you're expecting to see in terms of how companies are reporting against COVID and whether there will be any further guidance from the FRC on how to deal with that specifically. This report.
Can I kick off?
Sorry,
on
I
that?
should. Oh, go.
Sorry, I was just going to kick off and then invite Phil and David to see whether they had any views. I mean, I think our view would be, obviously it's evolved very quickly over 6 months, and also it would be a general statement to say not every company and not every sector has had a massive negative effect from COVID. Some sectors have either, because of what they do, been able to go through the initial impact of the pandemic unscathed relatively. However, we've seen other companies either have to pivot their business activities, close some down, look at them in totally different ways. So I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all on how to talk about COVID and its impact on your activities going forward. And obviously, it would be dangerous to apply it because obviously there are sectors like tourism, aircraft, and other sectors that are more disproportionately affected than others. So, Phil, I think we've seen people talk about it in different ways, but I think where they've had the best success, it's been where they've been very open and honest as to the proportionality on its impact on its operations and its views as to its future operating model. As Phil was talking, cash, capital, all of those important factors. Phil, did you want to expand on that?
I think that's absolutely right. And what we tried to reflect in the reports that we produced over the summer was the range of different circumstances, I guess, that different companies were facing. So we used examples from, for example, the airline industry, which set out very honestly, the different scenarios that we're looking at and the impact that it's had on their results. The one thing I was also as well as industries that might benefit from this, so particularly tech industries and others where clearly there have been some opportunities. I hate talking about opportunities as a result of something as awful as this, but nevertheless, companies have been able to adapt their business models for a more technological approach to things. The one thing I was also going to add, Kate, if I may, is the lab is going to produce an updated report or two updated reports to update the examples that we had in June. And the reason for that is when we put out the reports in June, we were at very early stages of reporting. So we weren't seeing at that stage March year ends, for example. Whereas now we're a few months down the line, we've got a few more examples that we wanted to put out there. So that will be coming out in a couple of weeks as well. Quite a lot coming up.
Okay, super, Phil. Thanks for that. Now, we've just launched the final poll, and this is about moving forward and what areas you'll be focused on in terms of your reporting, as well as what areas you're feeling pressure from investors. And then there's a question about the sustainability frameworks that you'll be using. I'm hoping that you'll all be ticking SASB. You'll be considering this year after hearing the FRC and TCFD, of course. And then our last question on that is, are you considering extending your reporting suite? Now, we didn't actually know about all these different reports, but we have put a whole bunch in there to see. So hopefully we'll capture some details on that. Kate wanted to say something.
Yeah. Well, look, I mean, it's a bit of a plug. And Sally, you did agree to send around. If there are people who are not part of our subscribers mail out list, please, if Sally will send around the details so you can sign up and you will receive notifications of all the many reports and output that we put through. David and Phil have gone through some of them today. There's lots of different reports across the FRC which hopefully do inform all our stakeholders and report on the numerous activities underway. So I think, Sally, you'll send that to these attendees, because it's a great way of keeping up to date on some of the good work that we've described here today.
Yeah, definitely. So just before I close then, I just wondered if we could just have 2 or 3 things from each of you that you want all of these wonderful corporates that have been in attendance listening today to take back to their organizations. 2 or 3 key crisp messages would be super.
Well, I'll start off with 2, give David and Phil a chance to, and Deepa to think up there too. I would say the transformation project is vast and it's important. And we are making good progress on it, and we'll ask all of you as parts of our stakeholders to participate in the consultation part of that as much as you can. And also, I think this webinar has been a great opportunity to remind you of how many things we are involved in, how many things we regulate, all of the kind of jigsaw puzzle that the FRC brings together in terms of corporate reporting, corporate governance and standard setting. And I hope that that's what we achieve today. David, over to you. That was enough time, surely.
Thanks very much. Just enough time. I've got two to kick off with. One is around AGMs. I'd like to thank everyone. I didn't mention that we spoke to a wide range of stakeholders about AGMs, including obviously corporates and company secretaries. And thank you for the feedback that we got on that. It's likely that we'll be coming back to you next year. Not next year, but this year into next year to talk about AGMs. I think we're particularly interested in the use of technology and how companies can maximise in a way that's most useful for companies and for investors. How they engage with their stakeholders at AGMs, and that's going to be a really important thing as we go through this year and into next.
And Deepa, giving Phil the mic. Oh no, that's two. Are you going to go for three?
I was just going to mention again on the corporate governance code. I think, unfortunately, as Phil says, we always try and look for positives, and it's been a poor time. It's been a dreadful time for a number of people. We're trying to look for positives, and I think that it does actually give companies and, in fact, investors the opportunity to look at how their relationships and how their engagement with a wide range of stakeholders for companies, it's their shareholders and a wide range of investors. For investors, it's asset owners and clients and beneficiaries as well, and look at how they can improve governance and stewardship and report on that in an effective way.
And Deepa, what about you? What are your two messages?
So my two messages, the first one would be on non-financial reporting and creating a meaningful story from the non-financial reporting. So thinking about the existing framework, you have the non-financial reporting requirements in the strategic report, as well as the section 172. These are all a connected story. So thinking about what are the matters that are most relevant to the business model within which the company operates. The second one would be to really think about, if you had a blank sheet of paper, what improvements would you make to your corporate reporting as a whole to improve it and reshape it?
Great. And Phil, you got to bring us home now. They better be good ones.
Oh no, the other two have taken my 2 points. We're going to be, make the most of technology. David stole that one, and then and Deepa mentioned business model, and I think what investors are really looking for, and other stakeholders are really looking for, is how are companies adapting their business model for the future, both in response to COVID and the changing working environment that we're operating in, but also in response to some of the other challenges out there, particularly around climate change and the different workforce. And I think someone in the Q&A also mentioned, social. Companies making sure that they're explaining how they are thinking about their social responsibility. So those are the two areas, and technology. But I was going to bring it home, Kate, but the other two stole my topic. So
well, I think that gives. I hope that gives all of the participants a good sense of what we're focusing on, what we're working on, and where we need their help to make these consultations really inform our decision making and regulatory framework.
Perfect. Okay, well, it's 4:00, just passed. I just wanted to thank everybody for spending the last hour and a half with us Friday, dreary afternoon, so well deserved. Thank you so much for joining us today. And, all of those things that we talked about today We will circulate a little summary from the event with all the key references. And as Kate said, we'll send the details so how you can subscribe directly to the FRC's list as well, and look forward to you engaging with us. And I think the two things that I took away from today are the two things that I think that we're very strong at, and that's really telling a connected story across all of your communications as it gets more complicated and really cutting through. And we're very involved with a lot of our clients in helping them navigate this field of SASB, TCFD, and all the other non-financial metrics. And also the use of technology, which is going to be the power play of the future, I think. And again, as Phil mentioned before, we're very on top of that and doing the latest developments to help our clients manage that into the future. So looking forward to hearing from you. Have a great Thanksgiving weekend. And
happy Thanksgiving.
Yes. And thank you so much to Kate, David, Phil, and Deepa for spending their time with us, and look forward to connecting with all of you soon.
Thanks for the opportunity. Goodbye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Happy Thanksgiving.